The delusion she was working on confirmed it. The correction was accurate. The fault line is real. It is exactly where the red line said it was. The archive is now closed until we unseal the next file. Sleep well. Tonight, we access Case File 094. This file is not a traditional narrative. It is a forensic reconstruction, an attempt to assemble a coherent timeline from a collection of disparate and deeply disturbing artifacts. The file was unsealed on October 28th, following a Priority 1 alert from the United States Geological Survey. A remote monitoring post designated Lassen Sector Station 9 had gone silent. Station 9 is, or rather, was, a high-altitude geological observatory. It is not a place one simply visits. It sits at an elevation of over 8,400 feet, perched on a volcanic ridge in a desolate sector of the national park. The station itself is little more than a reinforced concrete bunker, built to withstand unimaginable cold and hundreds of tons of snowpack. Its purpose was singular: to monitor deep earth tremors, to listen to the planet's most subtle movements. The equipment housed within Station 9 was some of the most sensitive on the continent, designed to detect signals so faint they are lost in the noise of human civilization. This is why the station was built where it was. It is one of the quietest places in North America, both seismically and acoustically. Access is, by design, extremely limited. A single, winding service road, unpaved and treacherous, connects it to the nearest ranger station nearly 30 miles below. From late October until June, this road is impassable, buried under drifts of snow that can exceed 50 feet. During these long months, the station is accessible only by helicopter, and only in the clearest weather. It was, in every sense of the word, a place of profound silence and profound isolation. The going silent alert was triggered not by a missed radio call, but by a data anomaly. The continuous stream of seismic data that Station 9 transmitted to the central USGS hub in Colorado simply stopped. The feed did not corrupt. It did not show errors. It terminated, as if a cable had been cleanly severed. This was followed, 3 hours later, by a missed mandatory check-in. When the first response team, contracted through the county's search and rescue air wing, was finally able to fly to the coordinates, they found the station partially obscured by an early, unseasonable snowfall. The helicopter was forced to land on an exposed ledge a quarter-mile away, and the two-man team proceeded on foot through the thin, biting air. Their initial report, logged via satellite phone, noted no external damage to the station. The solar arrays were clear, the communication mast was intact, and there were no tracks in the fresh snow, save for their own. But one detail was immediately and unnervingly wrong. Taped to the exterior of the station's heavy, insulated steel door was a 2-page letter. It was handwritten on official USGS letterhead. The paper was stiff and cold, secured to the metal with 4 precise strips of industrial-grade electrical tape, one at each corner. The team's protocol dictated they wait for a full geological survey team, but the combination of the silence, the letter, and the lack of any response from within prompted an emergency breach. They used their clearance code. The heavy door unlocked. The interior of the station was cold. The primary heating system was off, and the air held the sterile, metallic smell of dormant electronics. The station was, by all accounts, immaculate. The small cot was made. The kitchenette was clean. There was no sign of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No indication of panic. It was, in its own way, as silent and orderly as the landscape outside. This is what makes the other discoveries so difficult to process. The response team located 2 items that formed the core of this case file. The first was the letter itself. It was a formal resignation, effective immediately. The handwriting, confirmed by comparison to existing logs, belonged to the station's sole occupant, Dr. Eva Rostova. The script was precise, the strokes firm. It was not the writing of someone in a state of panic. It was deliberate, calculated. The contents of this letter remain sealed by federal request, but its existence serves as the first marker of a profound psychological break. The second artifact was found in the station's small, metal-lined waste disposal unit. It was the station's primary data logger. This unit, a hardened black box recorder painted bright orange, is designed to be the single most durable piece of equipment in the entire observatory. It is built to withstand fire, impact, and extreme cold, ensuring that the station's data survives even if the station itself does not. It had been systematically and deliberately destroyed. Forensic analysis of the logger confirms the tool used was a standard-issue geological hammer, which had been kept in the station's emergency kit. The force required to breach the unit's hardened casing was significant. The internal data cores, the delicate magnetic spools and solid-state drives, had been meticulously shattered. It was not an act of random vandalism. It was an act of precise, targeted annihilation, a complete and total erasure of the station's scientific record. We are left, then, with an enigma. Dr. Eva Rostova was not a novice. She was a highly credentialed senior seismologist with a 14-year exemplary record. She was known for her meticulous work, her analytical mind, and her stated preference for high isolation postings. She had requested the assignment at Station 9. Her psychological evaluations were flawless. Our purpose, therefore, is not to ask what happened. The physical evidence is clear. Dr. Rostova abandoned her post and destroyed government property. Our purpose is to understand why. How is a scientist of this caliber, a woman defined by her logic, her competence, and her professionalism, reduced to this? What could she have encountered in that profound and terrible silence that would make her not only flee, but first erase the very data she had dedicated her life to collecting? The only place to find that answer is in the data that was not destroyed. The station's secondary, unofficial logs. Dr. Rostova's personal journal. The reconstruction begins with her arrival. To understand the events at Station 9, we must first understand the observer, Dr. Eva Rostova. Her file is not that of a typical field station technician. It is the file of a senior, and some might say, elite scientific analyst. Her assignment to the Lassen sector was, as the previous entry noted, voluntary. In fact, it was requested. Her transfer application, filed 8 months prior to the incident, is illuminating. She sought the post at Station 9 specifically because of its isolation. For the 3 years prior, she'd been a lead analyst at a monitoring station near Parkfield, California, a place famous for its seismic activity. Her logs from that period are filled with a palpable, if professionally worded, frustration. The data, she argued, was contaminated. The seismic noise of human activity, she wrote in one quarterly memo, is drowning out the planet. We are listening to our own trucks, our own drilling, our own infrastructure, not the mantle. The signal is lost in the noise. Eva Rostova was a specialist in low-frequency, deep earth phenomena. She was not interested in the sudden, violent rupture of an earthquake. She was interested in the slow, creeping, almost imperceptible movements of tectonic plates, the whispers of the subcrust. To her, the Parkfield station was a cacophony. The constant rumble of the San Andreas Fault, combined with agriculture, highway traffic, and oil extraction, created a signal-to-noise ratio that she found unacceptable. Her colleagues, in deposition statements given after the incident, described her with a consistent and telling vocabulary. Clinically precise, respectful, but distant. The most competent analyst I've ever known. She was a scientist who found her comfort in data, not in social gatherings. Her world was one of numbers, of waveforms, of predictable, physical laws. She trusted mathematics. She trusted geological time. She saw human interaction as a variable, an unpredictable element that introduced errors into the system. Station 9, therefore, was not a hardship. It was not a punishment or a lonely exile. It was a promotion. It was a chance to work in a clean environment, a laboratory of pure, absolute silence. It was, perhaps, the only place left on the continent where she could truly listen. Let us move to the arrival itself. The flight logs show she was transported via a contracted air support helicopter on September 1st. This was the end of the summer season. The air was already cold. The flight up the mountain is notoriously difficult. A 40-minute ascent over jagged volcanic ridges and deep, shadowed valleys. The air thins, and the winds that sweep across the scree slopes are violent and unpredictable. The pilot's post-flight report is brief, but contains one personal notation. He noted that Dr. Rostova was unusually calm. He stated she spent the entire flight looking out the bubble canopy, not at the dramatic landscape, but at her tablet. She was reviewing station schematics. She was already working. When they landed, the previous technician was waiting on the concrete landing pad. This was the handover. The outgoing technician, a man named Marcus Cole, had requested a transfer out of Station 9 after only 4 months, citing personal and family reasons. His relief at her arrival was, according to the pilot, visible. The handover was brief. It was formal. It was the exchange of keys, security codes, and a primary data drive. Dr. Rostova, in her heavy-duty parka, stepped onto the ridge. The pilot, in his own statement, noted the sound, the silence. The moment the helicopter's turbine spooled down to an idle, the quiet of the mountain was, in his words, deafening. The only sound was the wind, a high, thin hiss as it passed over the volcanic rock and the station's communication mast. The outgoing technician, Cole, boarded the helicopter immediately. He did not look back. Dr. Rostova was now alone. The pilot gave her a standard thumbs up. She nodded in return. The helicopter lifted off, the percussive whump-whump of its rotors echoing off the ridge, and then it was gone, descending down the mountainside until it was swallowed by the vastness of the forest below. And then, there was only the wind. Eva Rostova was left standing on the ridge, in the cold, thin air, looking at the concrete bunker that would be her home for the next 8 months. Her file indicates she stood there, motionless, for several minutes. She was, for all intents and purposes, the only human being for 50 square miles. According to a note she would later make in her personal journal, she had found her sanctuary. She unsealed the heavy steel door. The sound of its pneumatic locks disengaging was loud, a sharp hiss followed by a clunk. She stepped inside, the door sealed behind her. The sound of the wind was gone. Inside, the station was sterile, functional, and warm. The air was recycled, carrying the faint, metallic smell of machinery and ozone. It was a self-contained world. It had its own power, its own recycled air, its own deep water well, and at its center, the console, the bank of monitors and recorders that were her single, focused connection to the planet below. Her job was to be the observer, to sit in this sterile room and watch the world. She was, finally, alone, and she was, by all accounts, perfectly content. Her first entry in the station's personal log, dated September 1st, 21 hours, is brief. Arrival and handover complete. Systems nominal. The silence is correct. For the next 21 days, Dr. Rostova's logs, both the official, technical log and her private journal, paint a picture of perfect, scientific monotony. And for her, monotony was the objective. Her routine, as documented in these files, was one of meticulous, self-imposed discipline. It was her armor. Her day began at 6, without fail. Only after this, after the station's health was confirmed, would she attend to her own. A simple breakfast, a review of her work plan for the day. The middle of her day, from 10 to 14, was reserved for the EV, the extravehicular activity. This was her only physical contact with the outside world, and it was a ritual she did not take lightly. The process began with preparation. She would check the exterior camera feeds, noting the wind, the visibility, the position of the sun. She would check the atmospheric sensors for temperature and pressure. Then, she would dress. The thermal layers, the insulated, windproof parka, the heavy, cleated boots, the snow goggles, the emergency satellite beacon, which she would clip to her chest. She would move to the station's mudroom, a small, 2-door antechamber. It was, in effect, an airlock, designed to keep the station's sterile, warm interior from ever mixing with the hostile environment outside. She would step inside and seal the inner door, a pneumatic hiss, followed by the solid clunk of locking bolts. For a moment, she would be in a gray, metallic box, no bigger than a closet. Then, she would unlock the outer door. The sound that entered was not a roar, but a high-pitched, abrasive hiss. It was the sound of the wind, 30 miles from the nearest tree, with nothing to stop it. It was the sound of the mountain itself, and with it, the cold, a dry, biting cold that pulled the moisture from her breath. Her task on these EVAs was to physically inspect the 5 sensor arrays that fed the station its data. Array 1 was closest to the station, monitoring the station's own structural integrity. Arrays 2 and 3 were on the North Ridge, listening for high-frequency activity. In Arrays 4 and 5, Her most important instruments were set in the low-lying basin a half-mile to the west. These were the deep-bore sensors, the ones that listened to the planet's whispers. She would walk the same path every day. The landscape was brutalist, a sea of volcanic rock, gray and black, with patches of iron-red scree. The wind was her only companion. She wrote in her personal log, "The air out here is so thin, it feels like it could cut you. It's exhilarating. It's clean. There is no biology to complicate the geology. It is a place of pure physical law." She would clear ice rime from the sensor casings. She would check the integrity of the armored cables that ran, buried, back to the station. She would clear dust from the small solar panels that powered their remote transmitters. The work was simple, physical, and satisfying. It was a clear, solvable problem, a contrast to the complex, abstract data waiting for her inside. By 14, she was back inside, the ritual in reverse. Outer door sealed, the wind cut off, inner door unsealed. The silence of the station would envelop her again, a warm, welcome blanket of recycled air and the faint, almost inaudible hum of the central computers. She would spend the next 8 hours at the console. This was her true purpose. To an outside observer, the work would seem incomprehensible. Hours spent staring at green and black monitors, at lines, waveforms, spectrographs. But to Eva, these lines were a language. She was not looking at data. She was listening to the planet's pulse. She tracked the faint tremors from a magma chamber 50 miles away. She noted the slow, creeping fault lines settling, millimeters at a time. She could, she wrote, distinguish the noise of a distant Pacific storm, its energy vibrating through the crust, from the signal of the mantle itself. A log entry from day 15 reads, "The data from Array 5 is remarkable. The low-frequency fidelity is unprecedented. I am observing signals I've previously only theorized. The move was the correct decision." The first 3 weeks were, by this metric, a complete success. The logs are immaculate. The data is clean. The systems are nominal. Dr. Rostova is, by her own account, not just content. She is thriving. Her routine was her armor. The station was her fortress. The silence was her tool. She was the observer, and the world was behaving exactly as it was supposed to. Until day 22, the anomaly began on day 22. It did not begin with a sound or a sight. It began, as all things in Eva's world did, with the data. The log entry for 10:04 a.m. is a single, automated line from the station's diagnostic system. System flag, sensor array, 4, power, offline. On the main console, a single, amber light had begun to pulse. It was a silent, steady beat, a small, digital heart, warning of a failure. Eva's initial reaction, as noted in her personal log, was not fear. It was annoyance. Array 4 was one of the 2 deep-bore sensors. It was critical. A failure in its power unit was a significant complication, but it was a known complication. These were complex instruments in a hostile environment. Things broke. She ran the remote diagnostic. The system was clear. The sensor head was responsive, but the transmitter was dead. The reason was simple. The battery was not reporting a charge. This was frustrating. It meant an EVA, a physical inspection, and a replacement. It was a problem of logistics, of hardware. It was a problem she could solve. She began her EVA ritual. The thermal layers, the parka, the beacon, the mudroom, inner door sealed, hiss, clunk. She stood in the gray metal box, outer door unsealed. The sound of the wind flooded the small space. It was louder today, a deep, resonant howl that seemed to come from the rock itself. The temperature had dropped. The air was sharp, crystalline. She stepped out onto the ridge. The walk to Array 4 was the longest. It was a little over half a mile, leading down from the main ridge into a wide, shallow basin. The basin was a desolate landscape, a crater-like depression of shattered black rock and volcanic gravel. It was, she had noted, the quietest part of the entire sector. The wind pushed at her back as she descended, a constant, heavy hand. Her boots made a crunching, grinding sound on the gravel. It was the only sound, other than the wind and the muffled rhythm of her own breathing inside her hood. She saw the array from 100 yards away. It was exactly as it should be, a simple, 4-foot steel post, anchored in the rock. The small, dark rectangle of its solar panel, the sensor head, aimed at the sky. Nothing seemed out of place. There was no damage, no sign of impact. The post was not bent. The panel was not cracked. She approached, her eyes scanning for the obvious. A loose cable, a buildup of ice. She stopped. She was 10 feet away when she saw the problem. The power unit was housed in a black polymer-cased box, bolted to the side of the steel post. This box held the lithium-ion battery. The box was designed to be opened with a specific tool, an Allen key, and was sealed by 2 heavy-duty retention clips. The housing was open. The power cable, a thick, armored conduit, was dangling in the wind. Its connector head was clean and undamaged. The battery itself, a 3-pound, brick-shaped object, was gone. Eva stood motionless for several seconds. The wind pulled at her parka, a high-pitched whine passing the metal post of the sensor. This was not a failure. This was an impossibility. Her mind, the analytical, professional mind, began to cycle through permutations. First, the outgoing technician, Cole. Had he failed to secure the clips? Had he left the housing open? She dismissed it. The system had been online for 21 days. A loose battery would not have maintained a connection for that long. And if it had fallen out? Second, the wind. She looked at the empty housing. The battery sat in a form-fitted cradle. Even with the clips open, it would not fall out. It would need to be lifted, straight up. The wind could not do that. And even if it could, the battery, where was it? She began to search. Her protocol-driven mind took over. She started a standard grid search pattern. First, a 10-foot radius around the post, then 20 feet, then 50. The ground was bare. Wind scoured rock and gravel. There was nowhere for a 3-pound black object to hide. She looked under the few larger boulders. She scanned the ridges of the basin. She spent nearly an hour. The cold began to seep into her gloved fingers. Nothing. It had not fallen. It had been removed. This left only one, deeply unsettling, logical path. Animal interference? A marmot? A large raven, perhaps, drawn by something reflective? She looked at the housing again. The retention clips were not broken. They were not chewed. They were in the open position. An animal does not, cannot, operate a spring-loaded retention clip. Her mind was now in a place she did not recognize, a place without data. Someone. The thought was so alien she recoiled from it. Someone had hiked half a mile from the station, or, more terrifyingly, to the station from somewhere else, approached the sensor, opened the housing, and taken the battery. Why? Not for the battery itself. It was a proprietary unit, useless without the rest of the sensor. For malice? Vandalism? She looked around. The vast, empty basin stared back. There were no tracks. The wind would have erased them, of course, but the sheer isolation. Who would be out here? Why? She stood up, her search complete, and the true cold settled on her. The cold of the realization. Her station, her clean laboratory. It was not sterile. Something, or someone, had entered her system. She hiked back to the station. The half-mile ascent against the wind was brutal, but she did not feel it. Her mind was locked. She entered the mudroom. Outer door sealed. The howl of the wind was silenced. Inner door unsealed. She was back in the warm, recycled air, the hum of the computers, the world of logic. She sat at the console. The amber light for Array 4 was still pulsing. She opened the official station log. Her fingers were stiff from the cold. Her entry for 1530 reads, EVA to Array 4 complete. Found power unit housing open, battery missing. No signs of animal interference or weather damage. The unit's retention clips were disengaged. The battery itself is non-recoverable. She paused, her hand over the keyboard. She had to write a conclusion, a cause. Cause, unknown. Suspect, catastrophic thermal failure of the locking mechanism, or a failure of the previous technician to properly secure the unit. The battery itself was likely blown from the housing during high winds and is lost in the basin. Will requisition a replacement unit from Central. She hit enter. She had created a fiction, a plausible, logical story to fit an impossible, illogical fact. In her private journal, the entry for that night is different. It was not the wind, and it was not coal, The clips were not broken. They were opened. I searched for an hour. It's gone. I checked the exterior security cameras. The footage from the past 48 hours shows nothing, just wind and rock. She ended the entry with a single line. There's someone else out here. That single line in her journal marks a fundamental shift. The 21 days of productive monotony were over. The subsequent logs for the next 7 days are different. Her official technical reports remain precise, clinical, and accurate, but her personal journal entries are short, clipped, and observational. A new, unwritten protocol had been added to her day. She was no longer just observing the Earth. She was observing her perimeter. The station's exterior cameras, previously just a tool for checking the weather, were now her primary instruments. She began saving the daily footage logs, archiving them in a separate folder instead of letting the system purge them every 48 hours. She would sit at the console and scan the recordings, looking for what? A figure in the distance, a shadow moving against the rock. The cameras recorded nothing, just the wind and the slow, agonizing crawl of daylight and shadow across the volcanic plain. During this week, her EVA logs show she did not venture more than 50 yards from the station's outer door. She performed maintenance on Array 1, the sensor closest to the bunker, and then retreated. She was, in effect, a prisoner of her own vigilance. She was waiting for the replacement battery. The replacement unit arrived on day 29. The log entry is purely logistical. 11:04 a.m. Supply drop. Contract Air 309, 11P unit. 7B. Battery. 11 crate. Non-perishable rations. The sound of the helicopter's approach was a brief, violent interruption. A tear in the fabric of the silence. She watched it approach from the main window, a dark shape against the cold, bright sky. Per protocol, it did not land. The risk of a hot landing at that altitude was too great for a simple supply drop. The helicopter hovered, its rotor wash blasting the ridge with a force that sent gravel skittering across the rock. The noise was immense, a physical pressure against the station's concrete walls. The pilot lowered a single, waterproof, bright orange crate on a winch. Eva, already in her full EVA gear, moved onto the landing pad. The sound was deafening. She secured the crate, disengaged the hook. She gave the pilot a thumbs up, her face obscured by her goggles. The helicopter climbed, banked, and disappeared. The roar of its turbine faded, and the high, thin hiss of the wind rushed back in to fill the void. The silence was back, but it no longer felt clean. It felt expectant. She carried the heavy crate inside. She unboxed the new battery. It was identical to the one that had vanished. Solid, heavy, real. She now had no more reason to delay. She had to return to Array 4. Her personal log from that afternoon is a single sentence. 14:30, proceeding to Array 4 for unit installation. Her technical log, however, shows she spent 10 minutes first, sweeping the entire basin with the station's high-powered zoom camera. She scanned every rock, every shadow, every crevice. The feed was clear. She began her EVA. She sealed the inner door. She stepped into the gray antechamber. She unsealed the outer door. The wind was low today, the silence more profound. She stepped out, the new battery heavy in her backpack. The half-mile walk down into the basin felt longer than before. Every sense was heightened. The crunch grind of her boots on the gravel seemed obscenely loud. She found herself stopping every few hundred feet, listening, but there was nothing to hear. Just the wind, breathing softly over the rocks. She saw the sensor post from 100 yards away. It was unchanged, a single, dark line against the gray field of rock. She approached with a deliberate, steady pace. Her training kept her moving. Her training kept her calm. She was a professional, here to fix a piece of hardware. She reached the sensor. She unslung her pack, her movements methodical. She took out the new battery, placing it on the ground. She looked up at the steel post, and she froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her tool belt. On the flat, metal top of the sensor casing sat the missing battery. It was just sitting there, placed carefully, like a paperweight. It had been returned. She stared at it. The wind hissed. Her mind simply could not process the fact. This was not a prank. This was not vandalism. This was a message. It was a demonstration. I was here. I took this. I brought it back. I can come and go as I please. And then she saw the second object. Next to the return battery, placed with equal care, was a small, dark object. It was a piece of volcanic glass, obsidian, but it was not a raw shard of rock. It had been worked. It was dark, almost black, and flaked at the edges, honed to a sharp, leaf-like point. It was a blade, or an arrowhead, perfectly made. It was a gift, an exchange, a battery for a stone tool, a piece of modern, complex technology for a piece of the most primal, ancient technology. The implication was staggering. Someone was out here. Not a hiker, not a random vandal. Someone, or something, that lived by a different set of rules. Someone who saw her battery as a curiosity and who had left a payment in return. Dr. Rostova's log states she did not complete the installation. She left the new battery on the ground. She left the old battery and the obsidian blade sitting on the post. She documented the scene with her personal satellite phone, taking 3 photographs. They are now Exhibit 4 inches. This file. She returned to the station. Her pace, as tracked by her suit's GPS, was nearly a run. She sealed the doors. She engaged the heavy, manual storm bolts on both the inner and outer mudroom doors, a purely symbolic gesture. She was now locked in. At 1640, we see the first break in her professional silence. She used the station's high-band satellite email system to contact her direct supervisor at the USGS Central Office. The email is short, and its tone is urgent. Supervisor Eris, I'm reporting unauthorized persons at Sector 9. I have found physical evidence of deliberate, repeated tampering at Array 4. This is not a technical failure. I request guidance on security protocol. Please advise. The reply from Supervisor Eris did not come for 3 hours. 3 hours in which Eva sat at the console, watching the exterior cameras, watching the sun begin to set, painting the gray rock in shades of cold orange and purple. The reply is now Exhibit 5. It is a masterpiece of bureaucratic dismissal. Eva, I understand your concern. The high-altitude postings can feel exposed, but let's be rational. What you've likely got are backcountry hobbyists or local rockhounds. They're harmless. They see our gear, they get curious. They're not a threat. The official policy is, do not engage, do not approach. They will move on. And Eva, please keep this kind of local color chatter to the personal channels. We don't want to create an official security file unless it's a code-red physical threat. Just ignore it. Do your work. They'll go away. Eva read the message. The amber light for Array 4 was still pulsing, a silent, steady beat. Ignore it. Her professional training, her entire career, was based on not ignoring data, and the data was clear. She was not alone. The person who had been here was not a hobbyist, and they were not gone. The supervisor's email was a finality. It was not a rejection of her concern. It was a confirmation of her complete and total isolation. The failure of authority was now logged. From this point forward, Dr. Rostova's behavior, as reconstructed from her logs and system archives, changes. The station, her fortress of science, is redesignated in her mind. It is no longer a laboratory. It is a hard site, a place to be defended. Her new protocols are not in any USGS manual. She begins, on day 30, to ration her EVAs. She no longer inspects the arrays. She will not go outside, for any reason, unless it is a life-or-death maintenance emergency. The pulsing amber light from Array 4 is now a permanent and mocking fixture on her console. Her world shrinks to the 400 square feet of the concrete bunker. She becomes nocturnal. Her personal logs are now time-stamped at 2:03:04, 0 inches the morning. She sleeps in short, 2-hour bursts, always in her chair at the main console. She is listening, watching the cameras, waiting, but the cameras show nothing. The wind scours the rock. The sun rises. The sun sets. The silence from the outside world is absolute. And yet, despite this self-imposed siege, she is still a scientist. The data from the other sensors, the ones that are still working, continues to stream in. And in her terror, she clings to the one thing she trusts, the work. On day 34, she begins a new project. It is her primary thesis, the reason she came to this station. She is attempting to map a theorized but unproven subsurface fault line, a deep, dormant crack in the tectonic plate. To do this, She must synthesize terabytes of data, tiny micro tremors from Array 2, subtle, low-frequency rumbles from Array 5. She must cross-reference them with thermal data and magnetic field variations. It is a complex, three-dimensional puzzle, a work of pure, abstract interpretation. Her log from day 35 reads, "The work is progressing. The signature is there, but it is elusive. It appears to terminate in a basalt shelf that makes no geological sense. The data is noisy, but the answer is in the noise. It always is." She begins to draw a map. She uses one of the large format, laminated topographical sheets. She begins to plot her data points by hand with a blue ink felt tip pen. She works for 2 days, barely sleeping. The map becomes her world, a web of precise blue lines, calculations in the margins, question marks next to data points she cannot reconcile. On day 36, at approximately 22:40, a new light begins to flash on her console. It is not an amber light, it is a red one. It is the main alert for the station's geothermal generator. The system is reporting a pressure fluctuation in the primary loop. It is not a critical failure, but it cannot be ignored. The generator is the station's heartbeat. Her log notes this. She must leave the console room to investigate. The generator is not in the main living space. It is housed in a small, adjoining utility room, a server room, filled with the station's humming, vibrating, and loud machinery. She must leave her map. The file shows she is hesitant. She stands up from the console. She looks at the map, her work, sitting exposed on the table under the harsh, white, overhead lights. She goes to the utility room. The heavy, soundproof door closes behind her. The log indicates she was in the room for 15 minutes, running the diagnostic. It connects, with perfect, mathematical precision, to a series of micro-tremors she had dismissed as noise. It completes the map. It reveals the fault line. She sits, and she stares. The blood drains from her face. This is not the work of a hobbyist. This is not a rockhound. This is the work of a geologist. This is the work of an expert, an analyst with an understanding of her work that is, perhaps, greater than her own. The line is elegant. It is brilliant, and it is correct. This is the moment that shatters her. The entity, the antagonist, had been in the station, not just outside, in the basin, but inside her sealed, locked, storm-bolted fortress. How? She runs to the main door. The storm bolts are still engaged. The pneumatic seal is still hissing faintly. She runs to the small, secondary air scrubber vent. The bolts on its metal grill are undisturbed. She checks the exterior camera logs for the last 15 minutes. The footage is exactly as it should be. The camera shows the empty console room. It shows her chair. It shows the map on the table. It does not show anyone entering. It does not show anyone leaving. It does not show the hand that held the pen. The implication is devastating. The entity knew the camera's blind spots. It knew her routines. It knew she would be deafened by the noise of the server room. It had waited. It had watched her work, perhaps for days, from its hidden vantage point. It had watched her struggle with the data, and then, when she was gone, it had come in, and it had, with all the cold, dispassionate arrogance of a professor correcting a student, finished her work for her. It was not a threat. It was a judgment. Her personal log entry for that night is the last coherent one she will ever make. It is 2 lines, written in a shaking, almost illegible hand. It was in the room. It corrected the map. That last coherent entry, it corrected the map, marks the end of Dr. Eva Rostova as a scientist. Her subsequent logs cease. For 72 hours, the official technical log and her personal journal are blank. The meticulous recorder of data stops recording. We can only infer her state of mind from the station's internal, automated logs. The life support system notes that her C2 output was constant. She did not sleep. The pantry's automated inventory sensor shows she did not consume any food. The station's low-resolution, motion-activated security camera, the one that archives footage, not the one she was monitoring, shows us the reason. The footage is time-stamped. A new image captured every 15 seconds. We see her in the grainy, monochrome green of the night vision. She is sitting in the console chair. She is not working. She is not reading. She is sitting, perfectly still, in the dark, her head turned. She is staring at the table, at the map, at the red line that should not be there. For 3 days, she sits. She is a statue of terror, a subject, frozen in the cold, sterile light of her own compromised laboratory. Her logic, her armor, has been breached, and she has nothing left. On the 4th day, the storm arrives. The station's meteorological sensors had been predicting it for a week. A massive, low-pressure system, born in the North Pacific, rolling in to shatter the mountain silence. The barometric pressure alarm, a soft, two-tone chime, begins its warning. The wind, which had been a constant, high-pitched hiss, changes. It becomes a low, physical moan, a vibration that she feels in the floor, in the walls, in the chair. The station, a concrete bunker anchored to bedrock, begins to vibrate in sympathy with the wind. The noise is no longer external. It is in the room, a deep, resonant thrum that sounds like a distant choir. The external logs are a torrent of errors. Wind speed indicators are flagged as out of bounds, reading over 120 miles per hour. Temperature sensors report a wind chill of 40 degrees below zero. The station is being assaulted by the planet itself, and it is in this chaos, on the night of October 27th, the night before the abandonment, that the true climax of this file occurs. The time is 2:14 a.m. Dr. Rostova is huddled at the console, wrapped in a blanket. The internal camera shows her rocking, very slightly, in her chair. She is watching the storm data flood her screens. It is a wall of red, chaotic noise, and then she sees it, a new signal. It is not on the weather monitors. It is on the primary tremor monitor, the one that, by all rights, should be overwhelmed by the storm's vibrations. It is coming from Array 4, the sensor that was dead, the sensor with the exchanged battery, the sensor her supervisor told her to ignore. It is suddenly, impossibly, online. It is not transmitting seismic data. An earthquake is a wild, chaotic, complex waveform. This signal is clean. It is a pattern, a series of short, precise, percussive spikes. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. The file shows she stares at this waveform for 3 full minutes. Her brain, the pattern recognition machine, is fighting against the implication. It is not the storm. It is not the wind. It is not the station's machinery. It is too precise. It is a rhythm, a cadence. Tap, tap, tap. It is Morse code. Her hands, shaking so badly we can see the vibration in the camera feed, move to the keyboard. She opens a translation subroutine, a simple diagnostic tool. She feeds the live signal into the decoder. The digital spikes are translated, in real time, into letters. The pattern repeats. It does not stop. A single 3-word phrase scrolling across her screen. I-S-E-E-Y-O-U. I-S-E-E-Y-O-U. Tap, tap, tap. The file does not record a vocalization. There is no sound of terror. There is only the low, ambient hum of the console and the deafening, distant roar of the wind. Her last, flickering ember of scientific logic takes over. She must see. She must verify. The station is equipped, for search and rescue purposes, with a high-powered, military-grade thermal imaging camera. It is mounted on the roof, but controlled from her console. Her hand moves to the joystick. She activates the camera. The heavy, armored shutter on the main observation window clunks open. She pans the imager into the blizzard. The screen is a chaotic void, a sea of cold, swirling, dark blue and purple. The wind is throwing snow and ice horizontally. She cannot see the rocks. She cannot see the landing pad. It is a total whiteout, rendered in shades of cold. She scans the perimeter. Nothing. She scans the basin toward Array 4. Nothing. Just the storm. We can see her shoulders relax. A fraction. It was a ghost in the machine. A digital error. A sensor, finally failing under the pressure of the storm, creating a false, rhythmic signal. Her rational mind is desperate for this to be the answer. She sits back, her hand falling from the joystick, and the message on the other screen continues. I-S-E-E-Y-O-U. Her eyes, in the internal camera feed, drift. They move to the wall at the vent shaft cover. The screen, for a moment, is just blue, cold metal, the temperature of the roof. And then she pans, and the image appears. In the center of the screen, where the vent shaft grill should be, is a shape, a circle, a perfect, pale orange circle, a heat signature. It is not a machine. It is not the generator. It is the wrong temperature. It is 98.6 degrees. It is the signature of a human body, lying flat on the roof of her station in a 120 mile-per-hour blizzard. Looking down, the file shows she watches this image, this data point, for 20 seconds. The heat signature does not move. It is perfectly still. It is an observer, patient. The ICU was not coming from Array 4. It was coming from the entity on the roof who was tapping the message on the metal housing of the thermal camera. Right next to the microphone, the entity, the corrector, had been here this entire time. The internal camera shows Dr. Rostova. She does not make a sound. She simply and very calmly lets go of the joystick. She turns her chair, a slow, deliberate motion to face the center of the room. She stares up at the physical metal grill in the ceiling. The subject, finally and fully acknowledging the observer. The internal time-lapse camera feed, the one that records every 15 seconds, shows the next 6 hours. It is a record of an absolute and terrifying stillness. Dr. Rostova does not move from the chair. She remains in that one position, her body rigid, her head tilted back, staring at the ventilation grill in the ceiling. Outside, the storm is at its peak. The audio logs from the internal microphones are a wall of low-frequency sound. The thrum of the wind, the vibration of the concrete walls, the hiss of the air scrubbers, and somewhere in that chaos, the tapping. We do not know when it stopped. The audio is too dense with the storm's own noise. We only know that the heat signature on the roof, the pale orange circle, remained in the thermal camera's log for another 90 minutes, and then it too was gone. Lost in the swirling, frozen chaos of the blizzard, Eva remains in the chair. She watches the spot where the heat signature was. The darkness of the night passes. The storm's fury begins, very slowly, to subside. The wind's deep, resonant moan shifts back to a high-pitched, abrasive howl. At 6:14 a.m., just as the station's simulated dawn light begins to glow, shifting the room from black to a sterile, pale blue, she moves. The motion, captured by the camera, is not panicked. It is not frantic. It is slow, methodical. She stands up, her legs stiff. She does not look at the console. She does not look at the map. She walks to the station's emergency kit, a heavy, red, metal box bolted to the wall. She opens it. She removes the geological hammer, a 3-pound, steel-headed tool. She walks, with a steady, unhurried pace, to the main console. She removes the access panel for the primary data logger, the orange, black box, and with a clinical, dispassionate precision, she begins the erasure. The internal camera logs the motion, the raising of the hammer, the strike. It is not an act of rage. It is an act of surgery. She does not smash the unit wildly. She strikes with great force at the specific, reinforced joints. She breaks the waterproof seal. She pries open the casing, and then she attacks the internal cores, the spools, the solid-state drives. She strikes again and again until the data, the only digital record of the tapping, the only digital record of Array 4's impossible signal, is reduced to fragments. When she is finished, she carefully places the hammer on the floor. She sits at the console. The screens are still alive, still showing the storm's chaotic data. She pulls a single sheet of official USGS letterhead from the printer tray. She takes her own personal black ink pen, and she begins to write. The file shows the internal camera capturing her for nearly 20 minutes as she drafts the 2-page letter of resignation. Her handwriting, when analyzed later, was found to be firm, controlled, and perfectly legible. At 6:58 a.m., she finishes writing. She folds the letter and places it on the console. She then stands and begins her final, unwritten protocol. She moves to the locker. She puts on her full, high-altitude EVA gear, the thermal layers, the insulated parka, the heavy boots. She retrieves the letter. She retrieves the roll of black industrial tape. She walks to the mudroom. She unbolts the inner door. She steps into the gray metal antechamber. The inner door seals behind her. Hiss. Clunk. She opens the outer door. The sound of the wind, now weaker, but still biting cold, fills the small space. She steps out onto the landing pad. The pre-dawn air is a deep, bruised purple. The blizzard is broken. She turns. She faces the steel door of the station. She meticulously tapes the letter to the metal at eye level. 4 perfect strips. Then, she turns away from the station. At 7:05 a.m., the log from the GPS network shows she activates her personal emergency locator beacon, and then she begins to walk. The search and rescue team's report is filed as Case 094 Alpha. The contracted helicopter, the same one that flew her in, was dispatched at 7:30. The pilot's report states the winds at the ridge were still beyond marginal, gusting at over 70 miles per hour. They did not fly to the station. They flew to the beacon. Her signal was already 10 miles southeast of the station. This detail is critical. She was not on the service road. She was not in a known shelter. She was not following any known path. She was walking in a straight line down the most treacherous, ice-covered, and unstable volcanic slope of the entire mountain, a place no hiker or geologist would ever, under any circumstances, attempt to traverse. The SAR team found her at 10:33 a.m. The winch operator's report is the one that closes this part of the file. He states they found her in a field of deep, fresh snow. She was still walking. She was, as he notes, improperly geared. She had, at some point, discarded her heavy, insulated gloves. Her snow goggles were gone. She was suffering from severe snow blindness, her hands black with frostbite. When the operator was lowered, she did not react. She was non-responsive until he was close enough to ask about the station. His audio log captures her only recorded words from that day. Her voice is a dry, cracked whisper, barely audible over the rotor wash. "It needed a correction," she said. It was a good correction. Dr. Rostova was airlifted. Her official medical diagnosis was acute situational psychosis, induced by high-altitude exposure, prolonged isolation, and sensory deprivation. Her delusions were, in effect, pathologized. Her report of an observer was filed as a symptom. This is where the official file and the archival record diverge. The USGS Beta team, the cleanup crew, arrived 3 days later, after the storm had fully passed. They cataloged the scene, the abandoned station, the destroyed data logger, and they found the map, the one with the red line. It is Exhibit 6 inches, this file. The official addendum to the report, signed by Supervisor Aris, notes, Dr. Rostova was clearly working on a new theoretical model. The red ink notations are consistent with her own hand, likely using a personal pen during a period of high stress. They rationalized it. They folded the correction into her delusion. But what of the artifacts at Array 4? The return battery, the obsidian blade. The beta team's log for Array 4 is clean. The new replacement battery was still in its crate, inside the station. The post at Array 4 was, as they logged it, undisturbed. The old battery was not there. The obsidian blade was not there. The wind, the report concludes, likely scoured the post clean. The evidence had, quite simply, been erased by Eva and by the mountain. Lassen Sector Station 9 was officially decommissioned 2 weeks later. The given reason was structural instability and high cost, low return data. This, we know, is a bureaucratic fiction. The station is still there, empty, cold. The heavy steel door is bolted by the cleanup crew. Dr. Rostova's resignation was accepted. She never spoke of the incident again, not even to her family, and now works in municipal data entry far from the mountains. The file is closed, but the questions, they remain in the silence. Who or what was the entity on the ridge? The one who returned a battery and left a blade? And the final, unsettling note, the one that keeps this file from being truly sealed. The geological team that reviewed her map, the delusion she was working on, confirmed it. The correction was accurate. The fault line is real. It is exactly where the red line said it was. The archive is now closed. Until we unseal the next file, sleep well.